This is Kim Jong Un, ruler of North Korea. He's just 36 years old, but he commands the world's fourth largest military. He has nuclear weapons, and his family has ruled over their people using violence and terror for over 70 years. But Kim is a man torn between two worlds: the traditions of his brutal communist past and the need to become a legitimate, modern leader.
That is his dilemma. Am I going to come out and become a cleaner, softer dictator? Or am I going to continue to retain this criminal regime that I inherited from my grandfather and my father? And that dilemma, you know what? It could be the end of the Kim dynasty.
Kim Jong Un is only the third man to rule North Korea. He is following his grandfather and father in the role of supreme leader. They rule over their people as gods. In the 10th year of his rule, Kim Jong Un is at a crossroads. He's a dictator with a decision to make. Should he try to drag North Korea into the modern world and become a legitimate country, but risk losing his grip on power? Or should he continue to run a rogue state like his grandfather and father before him?
If I compare it to a movie, I would say it's Godfather 3. And that's when Michael Corleone wants to become a legitimate businessman and head of a business conglomerate out from the shadows of the mafia regime that he inherited. But without the mafia state, the Kim regime would not function. Why? Because it is under heavy sanctions, the only way that it can make hard currency is by illicit trade. The North Korean regime is in many respects a huge criminal cartel.
Guns, drugs, counterfeit cash, and cybercrime bring in an estimated $2 billion a year for Kim to spend.
That's his personal piggy bank. And that is the way the Kim Jong Un regime is sustained.
Recently, Kim has shown signs of modernizing. He's been stepping out with his First Lady and meeting other world leaders. But in 2017, he was dragged back into his family business. This is his elder half-brother, Kim Jong-nam, who was overlooked for succession. He left North Korea for a quiet life in China, surfacing on camera from time to speak out against the regime. But then it seemed Kim Jong Un crossed a line.
During the course of my reporting, I was told by a person with good connections to the intelligence community in the United States that Kim Jong Un had, in fact, been an informant to the CIA and was supplying information about Kim Jong Un to them.
These CCTV images show him meeting his suspected handler. A fascinated news media shadowed his every move.
He still had very good connections to the regime. So for the CIA to be able to recruit Kim Jong Un as an informer and to get whatever information he had, it would have been a huge deal for them. This would also have been considered very treasonous by Kim Jong Un.
It seems the time had come for Kim to deal with his older brother. February 13th, 2017. Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Kim Jong Un's brother enters the terminal unaware that two female assassins are also at the airport. Now, for the first time on television, one of the assassins tells her full, extraordinary story. It begins with her being recruited by a man who claimed to be a TV producer.
Pada waktu pertama saya kenal James tuh orangnya baik, terus kayak lucu juga kan. Ikut syuting, katanya ikut syuting gimana, saya bilang kan. Syuting kayak buat lucu-lucuan gitu, lucu-lucuan gimana, kayak gimana ya. Terkenal kayak boom-boom prank. Jadi saya juga mikirnya, oh ya udahlah gitu.
For months, Kim Jong Un's agents groomed City and another young woman to ambush unsuspecting members of the public and smother their faces with cosmetic creams in what they thought were hidden camera show stunts.
Saya kerap dan sering itu melakukan prank. Dipakai hand body dan pakai baby gitu, baby oil gitu. Jadi saya rasa ya seperti biasa aja gitu.
City's handler arranges a meeting at a cafe in the airport. There, she is to receive details of the target.
Terus pas hari hanya kan, kebetulan kan memang di KLAI kan lumayan rame. Nanti kalau misalnya kalau kamu acting yang ini ya katanya bagus ini, nanti kemungkinan bos juga akan kasih kamu bonus lagi. Dia ke saya bilang itu orangnya gitu. Pas tuh saya bilang yang mana gitu kan. Itu yang pakai jaket warna abu-abu katanya gitu kan. Yang mana? Itu oh yang botak, aku bilang kan. Kasih oh ya gitu saya ke tangan saya gitu.
This time, it isn't baby oil, but a deadly nerve agent. As Kim Jong Un's brother heads to his flight, the two women make their move.
Langsung kayak mengamuk gitu, habis ngamuk saya juga grogi. Cepat mungkin kan meninggalkan juga, ya udah aku juga buru-buru.
Seeking help, Kim Jong Nam heads for the airport's medical facility.
So at this point, Kim Jong Nam is in the infirmary and he is behind the door. And this is where this image gets very scary. There's a gentleman in all black walking near this door, okay? And he's got a rolly suitcase. He's checking in to make sure that Kim Jong Nam is receiving medical treatment. This is one of the operatives. It's a very elaborate operation. It's very old school.
The operation plays out like a Cold War spy caper. There are lookout men, a chemist to handle the nerve agent, a getaway driver, and a team leader, codenamed Grandpa. The young women have no idea what they've done. They are soon apprehended by the local Malaysian police.
Polisi juga nanya-nanya apa yang kamu lakukan di airport itu. Emangnya kenapa, saya bilang kan. Terus polisi itu tiba-tiba bangun, kamu tahu nggak apa yang kamu lakuin, katanya. Kamu itu terlibat pembunuhan oleh adiknya presiden.
The trial creates shockwaves around the world.
She's been charged for the most serious crime in the country, the crime of murder. For the offense of murder, there's only one punishment, and that is death, by hanging.
Soon, the chemist of the gang is also apprehended. He is caught on camera getting his story straight with North Korean embassy officials. This video evidence helped to build a picture of a ruthless political assassination. Both women were released after spending 2 years in prison.
Sebelum kejadian ini terjadi, saya nggak tahu menahu tentang Kim Jong Un. Nggak nyangka bisa sejauh ini terlibat kasus pembunuhan gitu.
Kim Jong Un's troublesome older brother was no more.
Kim Jong Un's half-brother died in such a terrible, humiliating way on camera. And Kim probably was very pleased that he was able to watch all of this.
Amid sobering scenes broadcast around the world, Kim Jong Nam's body is brought back to North Korea. It's accompanied by the same men spotted in the airport on the day he was murdered.
It was absolutely to send a message to do it in such a public way to everybody in North Korea and elsewhere that Kim will find you.
To understand Kim Jong Un, it's helpful to know the world he grew up in. Deep beneath the surface of North Korea, his father created an elaborate hidden kingdom that his children inhabited.
North Korea has a separate parallel geography that exists outside of anything North Korean citizens would know about. It's a secret network that includes roads, railways, and tunnel systems. It's a way of concealing Kim's whereabouts from spy satellites. Currently, we're looking at Kim Jong Un's Kangdong VIP complex. Kangdong complex is one of the favorite complexes of the Kim family. Kim Jong Un spent a lot of time there as a child. So this is a portal tunnel. We can see the tunnel entrance. There's a road that goes under the Taedong River. So what Kim Jong Un could do is, instead of going across that bridge, he would go through that tunnel, and that tunnel would take him under the Taedong River, into tunnels under mountains, to some unknown locale. And I call it the road to nowhere.
It's believed there are some 8,000 tunnels in North Korea, reaching up to 1,000 feet below the surface. Some tunnels are thought to extend more than 30 miles, including an emergency escape route into China.
So basically, Kim Jong Un can work in his office, take an elevator to a sub-basement level, get into a small motorcade, drive underground. And that explains a lot about Kim Jong Un's personality. Kim Jong Un grew up like that. This has been his entire life.
The early years of Kim Jong Un's childhood indoctrinated him in the ways of the Kim dynasty.
Kim Jong Un grew up in this extremely dysfunctional, paranoid, secretive family. It was impossible for Kim Jong Un to be a normal child. He was named the Little General. He had a real Colt pistol. You know, he had real generals bowing to him.
His father was Kim Jong-il, one of the most notorious dictators in history, a man with a passion for banquets, cognac, and Bond movies.
Kim Jong-il was generally paranoid. Around this period of time for Kim Jong-un, there's a lot of restrictions on his movements and activity, and they have to bring in playmates. Well, you'd think they bring in other 7- or 8-year-old children, but you're starting to talk about 30- or 40-year-old bodyguards. And so Kim Jong-un grows up very close to his bodyguards because these are his playmates.
Of all of Kim Jong-il's bodyguards, only one is known to have escaped North Korea.
그러니까 그만큼 사상교육을 받을까 죽음으로 보답하는 게 김정일이 경호원이고 김정일이 친일이에요. 그때 당시에는 젊었으니까 기백이 넘치고 첫째는 총이에요. 빵, 빵. 김정일이 하고 이런 총 쏘는 거, 태권도 하는 거 이거 많이 즐겨서 벽돌이 한 11장씩 하고 계속 타격 훈련을 하고 그러다가 이게 흔적이에요.
The bodyguard also remembers the current ruler of North Korea.
정문이도 보고 정철이를 보고 여정이를 보고 별장에 나왔는데 그땐 작잖아요. 그러니까 그게 비밀적으로 유지하고 김정은은 집안에서 갇혀서 나서 5년, 6년 됐잖아요. 다른 애들하고 만나는 일이 없으니까. 제가 생각해 보면은 많이 외로웠죠.
Today, Kim Jong Un still surrounds himself with these bodyguards. He has expanded the program, adding an elite unit to handle internal threats.
The guys that protect him, despite the fact that they wear suits, these people are very similar to SAS or Navy SEALs in terms of their skills and training. They inspect his food. If you had a sack of rice, that sack of rice is scrutinized and inspected for any irregular grains. And so every bag of rice is a perfect bag of rice. They bring his toilet. There is a portable toilet because they don't want a foreign intelligence agency getting a hold of his feces and then analyzing the blood contents for whatever diseases he might have.
So Kim Jong Un's psychology is deeply rooted in his father's totalitarian regime. But there is another side to Kim's experience: his school days in the West. Kim Jong Un is changing his country with a new style of leadership. It includes photo ops, North Korean style. Many think he's been influenced by the time he spent as a teenager in Switzerland. Living in the care of his maternal aunt and uncle, Kim Jong Un attended a regular public school in Bern.
My name is Nikola Kovacevic, and well, I know Kim Jong Un from my school in Switzerland. So this is pretty much Un as I remember him, wearing a typical sports outfit, very American. He was wearing Chicago Bulls shirts, shorts, and Michael Jordan shoes. We were quite impressed by that. We were playing basketball and Un was looking for people to play with. I'll never forget him with a, cheeky smile on his face, at the basketball court. We pretty much just played constantly. He was very, very passionate. You could clearly see that he wants to win. He was very good, very quick. He was on a completely different level than you might think by looking at the pictures from today. We all liked having him in our team. We did have interesting chats about North Korea. There was one occasion where I was just asking something like, how is it there? And I remember him saying that North Korea is very, very advanced. It's going to be a big player in the future. You can definitely say that he was proud of his country.
He really enjoyed kind of the life of being a rich kid in Europe. He saw NBA games in Paris. He went off skiing in the Swiss Alps.
But back in North Korea, there are changes inside the family. Kim Jong Un's mother is dying of cancer. which means Kim's aunt and uncle are about to lose their connection to the dynasty. Fearing they may be cast aside, they decide to act. Slipping out of the house under cover of darkness, his aunt and uncle take refuge in the U.S. Embassy. Claiming political asylum, they are spirited away to a military base in Germany.
Kim Jong Un was at home. They did not say goodbye. They left him in the middle of the night. It must have been an extremely traumatic experience for Kim Jong Un to be abandoned like that.
After debriefing by the CIA, Kim's aunt and uncle are given new identities, flown to the U.S., and vanish from sight.
For the past 20 years, they have been living this completely anonymous life in Middle America, running a dry cleaners. So nobody knows their true identities.
But journalist Anna Fifield tracked them down and arranged a meeting.
I did not expect them to show up, and even like that morning when they called to say they were on their way to where we'd agreed to meet, you know, I was surprised when they showed up. Kim Jong Un's aunt walked into the cafe. Like, I caught my breath because she looked exactly like her sister, Kim Jong Un's mother. And I spent the entire weekend with them talking about Kim Jong Un, about, you know, what he was like as a child. And they described him as a normal kid who was a little bit misunderstood. Quite strange. I distinctly remember sitting on the couch there with them. At the time, Kim Jong Un was launching missiles.
The projectile was fired from a 2,000-ton submarine, and South Korean military officials believe the missile's rocket booster did ignite.
There's Kim Jong Un in a submarine looking at missiles, and the uncle said, they never say anything good about him.
Kim Jong Un never completes his studies in Europe. Age 17, he's recalled to North Korea. Within a decade, Kim will find himself the supreme leader of the most repressive dictatorship on earth.
He had lived in the West, he had seen freedom up close. So when he took over, a lot of people thought that he would be a reformer. And in fact, early on in his tenure, he stood up and he said that North Koreans would never have to tighten their belts again. So if he wants to remain in power for decades, he can't just hold on like his father did. He really has to show an improvement in the standard of living inside North Korea.
성대한 열병식을 진행하게 됩니다.
Kim Jong Un is the only ruler of North Korea to have lived in the West. And his time in Switzerland left its mark on the supreme leader.
Kim Jong Un, in the early years of his rule, I saw this desire for his country to be more worldly, for his people to be more worldly.
In 2012, Kim ordered the construction of a ski resort near his capital, Pyongyang. More alpine centers followed, complete with all the après-ski perks.
I was one of the first foreigners to visit a little piece of Switzerland in North Korea. I could see the wheels turning in Kim Jong Un's head. Around that time, there was a lot of hope and speculation that this would be a moment for a very different type of North Korea.
Kim builds his citizens theme parks and shopping malls, all in the name of North Korea's bright economic future.
So we see the development of things like amusement parks, high-end restaurants, department stores. All of these things are also part of the Kim brand. It's designed to show his people that Kim is going to move the country forward.
In the drive to rebrand his kingdom, Kim has an ally, his celebrity wife.
Ri Sol-ju was a famous singer in North Korea. She would be instantly recognizable to any North Korean who's ever watched TV.
In 2018, Kim changes his wife's official title from comrade to First Lady.
She has a very distinct role. She's very much like the Kate Middleton of North Korea. She is there to kind of humanize her husband, but also the two of them together are supposed to be a kind of modern, aspirational couple. They're showing the future of North Korea.
Leading North Korea into the future presents Kim with another challenge. In a digital age shaped by the internet and social media, Kim is under pressure to ensure his people aren't left behind.
If he's going to rule for decades to come, he has to build his loyalty base. He wants to woo his generation. So he started experimenting with internet access, expanding cell phone access. Those are all monumental changes for a country like North Korea.
Recently, Kim has gone further, authorizing North Korea's very own social media stars.
This is where a big concert is going to take place. The occasion is to celebrate the music.
They even have their own influencers now. What they are portraying is a socialist fairyland. It's just absolutely amazing. And it's so carefully cultivated. Their role is to seduce people, to fall in love with the country. It's a smart strategy. But on the other hand, access to information is one of the most dangerous things for a leader like Kim Jong Un. Because if people see what life is like outside North Korea, the illusion could be broken. And that, of course, for Kim Jong Un, is terrifying.
For 75 years, the Kim family has relied on strength and terror for their survival. As Kim Jong Un attempts to transform himself from godlike tyrant to an approachable human leader, he needs backup within the family to maintain the dynasty's grip on power. But who can he rely on?
Around 2001, Kim Jong Un's father takes a train across Russia. The Russian ambassador is having conversations with him, and he asks him about succession. And he asks Kim Jong-il, who are your favorites as successor? And Kim Jong-il said, well, my sons are all idle blockheads. okay? It's my daughters that have the heart and intellect and mindset to be in politics.
Born 4 years after Kim Jong Un in 1988, Kim Yo-jong is nicknamed the Sweet Princess. Until the death of her father in 2011, Kim Yo-jong's existence was a closely guarded secret, even inside North Korea.
After Kim Jong-il died, with the succession of her brother, there was probably a conversation. Do you want to do this? Do you want to be involved in the nitty-gritty of North Korean politics? Some people don't have the ice in their veins to do it. Some people do. She said yes, and that's where we find ourselves today.
Quietly, Kim Yo-jong rose through the ranks to become her brother's propaganda chief. In 2018, he deployed his sister on her first foreign assignment, a mission inside enemy territory.
It was a really huge occasion when Kim Yo-jong arrived into South Korea, because she was the only member of the Kim family who had arrived in the South since the Korean War ended in 1953. So it was a really big deal.
The occasion was the Winter Olympics, dubbed the Peace Olympics, as athletes from North and South Korea competed together for the first time.
There was an ice hockey game where the two Korean teams joined together as one, and she was in the stands in the VIP section. I was able to walk down to see her in the flesh. She was very kind of enigmatic. She always had this kind of sphinx-like smile on her face. She said very little. So she became a real object of fascination at that time amongst South Koreans.
But Kim's sister hasn't just come south of the border to show face. With the eyes of the world on her, she opens peace talks with the South Korean leadership. Kim Yo-jong is becoming indispensable to the family firm.
She is the one that approves all the media and press and writing that comes out in English in North Korea. Any piece of paper and any email that gets directed to Kim Jong Un is most likely viewed by her. And that's a critical thing to have.
The Sweet Princess isn't only Kim Jong Un's right-hand woman. Recently, she's become a deadly player in her own right.
I believe there have been people that have been shot on the orders of Kim Yo-jong. That's Kim Yo-jong's psychology. She's a shark.
In a sign of her growing power, in 2020, Kim Jong Un promotes his sister over his own generals to the highest level of the Politburo.
Kim Yo-jong's prominence has dramatically increased in 2020. The thing that's most striking is she's gone from a role of being in the background to actually being a voice of the regime.
Kim's sister goes on the attack, threatening South Korean activists who continue to drop propaganda leaflets over the border.
엄중한 현 사태가 쓰레기들의 반공화국 비라 살포 망동과 그를 묵인한 남조선 당국 때문에 철회되었다는 것은 누구나 다 아는 사실이다.
She is the only individual who has been able to put out a personal opinion in North Korean state media. Even the leader himself very rarely is going to express any sort of personal opinion. This means that she has a unique, special, and privileged role in the North Korean regime.
Amid rising tensions between North and South Korea, in June 2020, Kim Yo-jong sends South Korea a message. Blowing up the government complex used for talks between the two sides.
Korean experts say the explosion was designed to cement the growing power of Pyongyang leader Kim Jong Un's younger sister, Kim Yo-jong.
In recent years, state media has referred to her as a central party cadre, indicating her tightening grip on power. This year, she took over some of her brother's roles in party affairs and foreign relations. Sources suggest she is now the real power holder in Pyongyang.
Now she is continually, even outside of her actual rank and position, bashing South Korea and the United States. This is a role that normally is reserved only for the supreme leader. It's classic North Korean provocation.
It seems Kim is on his way to resolving his dilemma: how to modernize the country without losing control. The answer: a dual dictatorship. His sister keeps order with the traditional tools: fear, aggression, and discipline. While Kim reinvents himself as a modern politician with a kinder, gentler image.
We have to remember, when we're talking about Kim Jong Un, his main aspiration and his main focus as a leader right now is resetting the North Korean political system so that he becomes more above the fray and doesn't necessarily have to sign off on any individual public execution.
Kim Jong Un does not want to be seen as a person who criticizes and badmouths, other leaders. So he leaves the dirty work in some respects for Kim Yo-jong to do.
Kim Yo-jong is the bad cop. Kim Jong Un gets to look like a cool-headed leader.
But in his bid to secure the dynasty and hang on to power, Kim is only halfway to the summit. To transform North Korea into a truly modern society, he must step onto the global stage and bring an end to 7 decades of isolation from the outside world. Kim Jong Un is the world's most dangerous dictator, boss of a ruthless communist dynasty that has ruled North Korea for 75 years.
There is this perception that he is a cartoon character, kind of Dr. Evil villain, right? But Kim Jong Un really is no joke. He is a ruthless dictator, hell-bent on staying in power.
Early in his rule, Kim Jong Un wiped out his enemies, then supercharged his nuclear arsenal. But Kim's greatest challenge lies ahead. The world is changing, To survive, Kim must change with it and bring his country into the modern age.
How far can he stray from what his father and his grandfather have created in trying to portray himself as a modern leader without losing control?
From the rogue nation of North Korea as new reports surface that Pyongyang is preparing for its next nuclear test.
North Korea is showing the world its new intercontinental ballistic missile.
This comes after President Trump said a major conflict with North Korea is possible.
Little rocket man. We can't have madmen out there shooting rockets all over the place.
In 2017, Kim Jong Un achieved his family's long-standing ambition, developing a nuclear missile capable of striking North Korea's mortal enemy, the United States.
My name is Jung Pak. I used to work at the CIA on Korea issues. The premier product that we would produce is the President's Daily Brief, which I wrote often. The toughest part is leadership intentions. When it comes to what's in somebody's mind, that is the most difficult part. I spent my entire career trying to crawl inside Kim Jong Un's head. What we learned is that not only was he an apt student of the legacy of his grandfather and father, but that he was also bigger, badder, and bolder in terms of how aggressive he was. The missiles and his weapons are now more powerful, more dangerous, more reliable, and more mobile. And that's what makes North Korea under Kim Jong Un a much scarier place and a much scarier adversary.
But Kim has a problem. Cut off from the outside world, his country's economy is on its knees.
North Korea has been facing U.S. sanctions since the Korean War, and they've just gotten progressively tougher and tougher. So it's a real struggle, I think, for Kim Jong Un to push his country forward. This is a country that has a chronic food shortage, it's isolated from the outside world. Kim Jong Un knows that in the long run, it's untenable for him to provide for his people.
To bring his country into the modern age and maintain his grip on power, Kim must lift the US-led sanctions banning international trade with North Korea. In 2018, he makes his opening move.
On June 12th, in Singapore, I'll be meeting with Kim Jong Un to pursue a future of peace and security for the world, for the whole world.
In 2018, Kim leaves Korea for only the third time as leader for a historic meeting with President Trump in Singapore.
The Singapore summit, it really was his big debut internationally. Kim Jong Un's coming out. Those were incredible scenes. I think that's a very telling example of the image that he wants to portray to his people. He's saying, actually, I'm very charming, I'm funny, I'm flexible, I'm spontaneous, and it's completely the reverse of what we may have thought of the North Korean leader.
In Singapore, North Korea's reclusive dictator takes his first steps on the world stage.
I'm John Bolton. I was a national security advisor for President Trump. For me, it was almost surreal to think that this was actually happening. A mistake in my view, but it was a historic first. It was very clear in the meeting that Kim was very much in control. He was observing Trump very carefully. Early in the meeting, Kim asked Trump, "What do you think of me?" Just testing people like that shows a level of confidence. I mean, what do you think of me is an invitation to say, you're a tyrannical dictator oppressing 25 million people, and I don't trust a word you say. That would have been an accurate answer, but it could have been a meeting stopper.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
How's the meeting going so far, sir?
But of course, Trump gave him a very glowing review. He was smart and so on and so forth.
Any progress, Mr. President?
Excellent relationship. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Kim comes prepared with a strategy for dealing with the American president.
There's a kind of magic that can happen when these two leaders get together. And I have to say, what I saw, it looked like a bromance. The North Koreans studied whatever they could to try to understand how President Trump thinks. His psychology, how to flatter him, and actually the North Koreans know how to do that very, very well. Kim Jong Un sent an envoy with a massive handwritten letter. North Korea is very old school, in a sense. They're not going to send email attachments. They're very formal. It was something that charmed President Trump that he got this massive handwritten letter.
It was kind of a rambling conversation. I was mostly worried that Trump not give away too much, but there was a discussion about joint South Korea and U.S. war games, as Trump called them, which he agreed to give up. It was a concession to Kim that none of us on the U.S. side knew was coming.
Okay.
It obviously made Kim very happy.
Thank you very much. It's fantastic. I was really being tough, and so was he. And we would go back and forth, and then we fell in love, okay? No, really. He wrote me beautiful letters, and they're great letters. We fell in love.
Kim has begun to reinvent himself as a legitimate world leader. He returns to his people a conquering hero.
The United States is North Korea's chief adversary. It is the central enemy. So if Kim can stand shoulder to shoulder with the US president, that is of itself a kind of victory. Kim Jong Un can tell his people, we are taken seriously by the most powerful leader in the world.
During the course of 2018, Kim Jong Un has proven himself to be very savvy and calculating in the way he has dealt with the outside world, luring Donald Trump out. Kim Jong Un kind of set off a race to meet him. Xi Jinping in China, nobody wanted to be left out. We suddenly saw this huge flurry of summits taking place, and it seemed like all of the leaders wanted to meet with Kim Jong Un.
North Korea is a very impoverished country, but it has nuclear weapons. Kim Jong Un can blow up half the planet if he chooses to in a major war. And that's what gives him a huge leverage that otherwise he would never have. When he met with Putin in Russia, Putin is very famous for meeting leaders across the world very, very late. Well, in Vladivostok, it was Putin who waited for Kim Jong Un. He wants to show the world that, you know what, even between friends, we have the upper hand.
But opening his secretive hermit kingdom to the outside world carries dangers for Kim Jong Un. At the start of his rule, he encouraged foreigners to set up businesses in special trading zones near the Chinese border. One of the first outsiders to arrive was South Korean-born U.S. citizen Kim Dong-chul.
외국인들만 숙소할 수 있는 그런 호텔을 제가 운영을 하게 된 겁니다. 이제 미국 CIA가 찾았던 것 같아요. 그때 당시에는 김정은이에 대한 권력의 취향이라든지 거절을 했다가 이 조국을 위해서 하는 일이기 때문에 당신이 반드시 일을 해줘야 된다. 그러한 부분들 중에서 가장 핵심적인 것이 바로 이 핵 활동에 대해서 무슨 방사포가 있는지 핵 관련 과학자, 핵 시설을 담당하는 경비대원을 내가 미션을 할 때마다 어떤 그런 불안감도 있고 저는 특수한 시계를 받았고 아주 초정밀적으로 이렇게 돼 있었는데 이런 시계 이 뭐라 그럴까 이게 시간을 표기하는 도청 장치도 받았고 또 다른 만년필로 된 녹음기가 또 있습니다. 이런 것들.
It's believed Kim Dong-chul passed secrets to the CIA for 4 years before he was betrayed by an informant and arrested. Kim Jong Un makes a very public example of his captive.
6개월을 받는 동안에 이게 상당한 고문으로 인해서 정말 엄청난 고통 속에 있다가 결국은 이제 기자회견을 하고 이게 마음은 상당히 이제 가벼워지는 그런 상황에 왔고 그때 한 6개월 동안에 조사받았던 그 고통스러움이 그 순간에 다 물거품이 되고 없어져 버리는 거죠.
The agent was sentenced to 10 years hard labor. He had become a pawn in an international chess game between Kim and the West. 2 years later, Kim meets with U.S. hostage negotiators to build on his warming relationship with President Trump.
And we do have breaking news right now. President Trump tweeting moments ago that 3 detained Americans have been released from North Korea.
비행기 안에 들어와 보니까 북한 상공을 딱 벗어나니까 그때 기내에서 방송이 나오는 거죠. 그 비행기에 타고 있던 많은 사람들이 환호하고 제가 이제 워싱턴에 도착을 해서 대통령이라고 해서 어떤 분이 이제 올라오신다고 얘기를 하는데 나는 이분인지는 난 몰랐죠. 오바마 대통령 시절에 내가 붙들려 갔기 때문에 오퍼레이션 쇼를 본 적이 없습니다. 완전히 이제 미국으로 안전하게 귀국한 것이 이제 이때 아주 실감이 나더라고요.
In releasing his hostages, Kim Jong Un bolsters his image as a modern civilized leader and buys credit with President Trump.
I want to thank Kim Jong Un, who really was excellent to these 3 incredible people. I really think he wants to do something and bring that country into the real world.
February 2019. Kim Jong Un sets out on a 2,500-mile journey. The destination, Vietnam, and a second crucial meeting with President Trump. The prize, winning a deal to lift the economic sanctions crippling his country.
When he went to Hanoi, I think he felt very confident. He very unusually announced through the state media in North Korea that this summit was going to happen, that he thought this was all going to go very well for him.
You know, the stakes were very, very high. From Kim Jong Un's side, he wanted to show his people that, you know what? I will make peace with Donald Trump. I will be the one North Korean leader who shakes hands and signs a deal with the US president. That was the promise Kim Jong Un made as he left the train station in Pyongyang.
On the first night of the summit, the 2 leaders meet for a dinner of North Korean steak, served well done for Trump and rare for Kim.
So this was the dinner before the summit, the night before. Kim Jong Un looks very comfortable and confident, and he must have put on a bit of a show. President Trump relayed a story that Kim Jong Un told about how, yeah, he executed his uncle and then displayed his head for the rest to see. In this day and age, to see that kind of brutality, very much like the heads of those beheaded by Henry VIII were stuck outside the Tower of London.
It's very interesting about 30 minutes.
Boy, if you could have heard that dialogue, what you would pay for that dialogue, that was good.
I think it goes to show that Kim Jong Un, deep inside, wanted to reach out to Donald Trump in a way that no other leader had reached out to Donald Trump, which is, you know what, Mr. President? Let's talk about raw power. I will tell you what raw power is. I will give you an example of what I did to my uncle. Donald Trump respects raw power, and that's what Kim Jong Un wanted to emphasize.
There are a lot of great ideas being thrown about. I think very importantly, the relationship is, just very strong.
With the dinner table talk out of the way, the two leaders get down to business.
Analysts say there is considerable pressure on both Trump and Kim Jong Un to come up with a more substantive deal than the one they struck in Singapore. Kim desperately needs sanctions to be lifted. Trump, he's got to come back with something more substantive than they got in June.
Kim, are you ready to denuclearize?
If I'm not willing to do that, I won't be here right now.
The North Koreans estimated that President Trump needed a foreign policy victory and that they would sign a deal. Kim Jong Un thought it was a sure thing. So they got down to the nitty-gritty of this nuclear deal. But it can quickly go sour.
In his opening gambit, Kim offers a limited deal to shut down North Korea's largest nuclear testing site in return for the complete lifting of all sanctions.
Trump was not prepared to make a partial deal. He was prepared to make only the big deal, which is the complete elimination of North Korea's nuclear weapons program. But Kim kept pressing for his more limited deal. Like many communist negotiators, he's very good at saying the same thing over and over again. The Germans have a word for it. They call it Sitzfleisch, and it means exactly what it sounds like, that he'd just be prepared to sit there for as long as it took. So Trump and Kim went around and around. We could see the frustration that Kim felt that he wasn't getting through. So there came a point where kind of silence descended on the room and lasted, and it was at that point I think everybody realized this meeting is really over.
Astonishing. The second summit between the U.S. and North Korea is over.
The headline here, no deal.
The two leaders' motorcades roared away from the summit site within minutes of each other.
Sometimes you have to walk.
They literally left a lunch on the table in Hanoi and went off back to their respective capitals. So I think it was a miscalculation.
Kim Jong Un was very, very sure he could reach a deal in Hanoi. So on the long train ride back to North Korea, Kim Jong Un must have asked himself, who am I going to blame for this failure? Who will be the person who will fall by the sword?
Kim Jong Un was very angry. He lost faith in that he didn't have a deal. He left empty-handed, and that has increased the pressure on Kim Jong Un since.
Failure to reach a deal with Trump is a major setback in Kim's bid to normalize his regime. At least 3 of his officials are thought to have been executed or purged as punishment. Kim was returning to the system of terror that has sustained his dynasty for 3 generations.
In North Korea, the border is not just solid, It is highly impenetrable. Except for that joint security area where there is no fence. A North Korean soldier called Oh Chung-sung, the top soldier in the Korean People's Army, stationed right along the 38th parallel. Only the creme de la creme are posted along the border. But he dashed across the line, running for his life. He was shot at by North Korean guards.
As the North Korean soldier lies wounded in the demilitarized zone, which separates North and South Korea, troops stage a rescue attempt.
He was miraculously saved. He was then taken by helicopter to a Korean hospital. It was discovered that there were many worms in his body. He was a healthy soldier who got the best treatment in North Korea, but he was still suffering from malnutrition. And this was a shock to many people who were watching what's happening in North Korea. This particular video must have shown Kim Jong Un that security along the border was paramount because even the most trusted lieutenants were ready to jump ship. I think Kim Jong Un would have been very angry at the generals who allowed this to happen under their watch. And I'm sure they were reprimanded and imprisoned or even, even worse punishment for this.
To clamp down on a rising tide of defectors, Kim has increased border security and threatened would-be traitors with severe punishments. But the dictator remains torn between his allegiance to the family dynasty and the pull of his teenage years in the democratic West. Shortly after he took power, he tracked down an old friend in Europe.
Plötzlich waren Leute von ihm bei mir im Restaurant und haben eigentlich gesagt, ja, wir sind auf Anordnung von ihm da. Er möchte Sie gerne wiedersehen und können Sie morgen nach Nordkorea fliegen. Es war einfach unwirklich. Ich bin Joao Michaelo, wie man es halt weiß. Also ich war früher in der Schule mit Kim Jong Un. War ich halt wirklich sein bester Kollege. Ja, wir haben sicher zusammen viel gelacht. Ab und zu am Nachmittag mal Videospiele gespielt oder irgendwelche Filme geschaut. Haben wir zusammen. Also mit ihm habe ich angefangen zu rauchen. Das glaube ich schon, dass es ziemlich unbeschwert war. Wo wir losgefahren sind, war es ziemlich dunkel. Und dann sind wir wieder in eine Tiefgarage rein und ewig da rumgefahren und dann durch verschiedenste Räume und dann waren wir dann da. Also er ist dann um die Ecke gekommen, dann haben wir uns schon umarmt, er hat sich gefreut, gekommen bin.
When you spent your most formative years in a very westernized country, studying in Switzerland as a teenager, that will stick with you. is this nostalgia.
Haben wir kurz zusammen Basketball gespielt. Also ich habe ihm dann auch gleich gesagt, ich glaube, wo ich den Basketball gesehen habe, habe ich gesagt, du weißt, ich habe schon ewig nicht mehr gespielt.
He will never be able to have that life back again, but if he invites his childhood friend to come back to North Korea, it's like satisfying a part of his life that he yearns for, but he can never replay.
Dann haben wir eigentlich am Tisch über die frühere Zeit geredet und wie es mir geht, über mein Leben, weil er wollte halt wissen, was ich so mache oder was ich gemacht habe. Es war ein bisschen etwas koreanisch dabei, aber sie haben eigentlich vielleicht, um mir eine Freude zu machen oder vielleicht auch aus Angst, dass ich es nicht mag, es gab auch ein Fondue. Und dann habe ich mal so ganz schüchtern gefragt, ja, ob ich dann schnell eine rauchen dürfte. Und er hat gesagt, ja, natürlich. Wir haben zusammen angefangen, wir werden auch zusammen aufhören.
Kim's 2 meetings with the US president had failed to deliver a deal on North Korea's nuclear arsenal. In June 2019, Trump rekindles the bromance.
President Trump touching down in South Korea just a short while ago after having extended an apparently impromptu invitation to the leader of North Korea.
I just put out a feeler because I don't know where he is right now. He may not be in North Korea, but I said if Chairman Kim would want to meet, I'll be at the border. It's certainly, we seem to get along very well.
The meeting at the DMZ was entirely impromptu. He tweets an invitation to the North Korean dictator to meet. And North Koreans finally do respond. And Donald Trump marveled that apparently Kim Jong Un follows me on Twitter.
After the breakdown of the talks in Hanoi, Kim Jong Un desperately wants and needs the opportunity to meet again with President Trump. Kim Jong Un needed some imagery to tell his people, things are fine, we're still friends, I've got it under control. The North Koreans would have loved imagery of Kim Jong Un slowly making his way to the demarcation line. President Trump was there more quickly, clearly more anxious to cross over to the North Korean side. They would have loved that. The idea that an American president wants to step into North Korean territory, propaganda gold.
Suddenly, Donald Trump is walking with Kim Jong Un in North Korea. You know, the first American leader to set foot in North Korea. And then they walk back over to the South Korean side. And we did not know that it was truly going to happen. And it was a scene of total chaos.
They're going straight.
Suddenly, it appears that they're going to be going inside this building, and the North Koreans actually try to block the American press from going over. Let's go. And so Stephanie Grisham, Donald Trump's press secretary, essentially decked a North Korean security guard who was trying to block the American press from following the two leaders into this room.
U.S. rules. No. Stop.
Someone help.
I know.
U.S. rules.
You know, this was an extraordinary photo op, but it accomplished absolutely nothing beyond the photo op.
There's no question today's meeting was an historic first, but after 2 summits and 1 impromptu meeting, North Korea's nuclear program remains fully in place.
With no breakthrough in sight, in the fall of 2019, the dictator changes course. In a symbolic statement to his people, he makes a pilgrimage to the sacred Mount Paektu, mythical birthplace of the Kim dynasty.
It's not just that Kim Jong Un likes riding horses. There's another purpose here. It is part of the propaganda. He's really focused on a particular king, Kim Jong Un. And Kim Jong Un is a warrior who's often shown fighting off foreign influence and bringing the country together on a white horse. And so it's a way to remind his people that I am the successor of that heritage and I have a right to rule.
Turning his back on President Trump, Kim threatens to deliver a so-called Christmas gift to the United States.
Kim Jong Un was disappointed he could not convince Mr. Trump. I think he realized, okay, if Trump will not negotiate with me, I will make a bigger hammer. So that's a message that I think he wanted to send the world. I will show you how powerful I am. I will show you who's really boss in this neighborhood. And it's me, Kim Jong Un.
October 2020, Kim celebrates 3 generations of his family's rule. His talks with Trump have failed to remove the sanctions holding back his economy. How long can he maintain the loyalty of his people?
동지들, 하늘 같고 바다 같은 우리 인민의 너무도 크나큰 믿음을 받아 안기만 하면서 언제나 제대로 한 번 보답이 따르지 못해 정말 면목이 없습니다.
In allowing the people to see him cry, Kim Jong Un on October 10th wanted to show that he's human too. He wanted to show that vulnerability. Yes, I am almost like a god and I was born to lead this country, but I'm a father like you. I care about my children like you. I care about our future like you. So it was designed to be a particular show of humility and to show his personality, but I can't help but think it's also theater. And so we are moving into a phase where we have less access and less information because it's so carefully cultivated. He wants to seem like somebody who actually is in touch with his people, but it's very hard for us to tell whether we can trust it.
Economically, they're in very, very deep trouble. Sanctions, pandemic, and floods, all those problems have combined to make North Korea's economy, which was already on its knees, nearly on its deathbed. And yet, Kim Jong Un continues to develop nuclear weapons. I think it's very dangerous because if you are cornered into a position where there really is no exit, then you might look for extreme solutions.
만약 그 어떤 세력이든 우리 국가의 안전을 다쳐넣는다면, 우리를 겨냥해 군사력을 사용하려 든다면 나는 우리의 가장 강력한 공격적인 힘을 선제적으로 총동원하여 응징할 것입니다.
In 2020, Kim unveiled the world's largest mobile intercontinental ballistic missile, nicknamed the Monster. Despite his attempts to modernize North Korea and remake his image, Kim Jong Un remains the dictator of a rogue state that is now more dangerous than ever.
You can't prevent irrational regimes, but you can certainly do everything possible to keep the world's most dangerous weapons out of their hands. I think obviously you have to consider the use of force. I don't think the end of North Korea is likely to be pleasant in any circumstances.
It's thought Kim now has at least 40 nuclear missiles and is close to completing a new secret weapon that would pose a greater threat to the West than ever before.
이제 세상은 곧 멀지 않아 조선민주주의 인민공화국이 보유하게 될 새로운 전략 무기를 목격하게 될 것이라고 확언하셨습니다.
They're building a new 3,000-ton submarine with the ability to fire ballistic missiles.
Once they reach certain technical metrics, North Korea can then put one of these ballistic missiles on a submarine. Submarines are very difficult to track. It's basically a roving threat and a moving target. North Korea can then float that submarine out to the Pacific Ocean and scare the crap out of people in Los Angeles. A whole other mess of stuff that keep people up at night.